It was a Thursday evening when it happened. Ordinary, unremarkable, and yet it became the night I could never forget. I was driving home from the city after a long shift at the hospital. My residency was grueling, but I loved it. The rhythm of my life revolved around bright fluorescent lights, hurried footsteps, and the adrenaline of emergency calls. That night, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. My car, a beat-up Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it, rumbled down Route 17, a quiet stretch of road that connected the city to my little suburban apartment. The road was a straight shot, but notorious for its blind curves and the thick fog that rolled in from the surrounding fields. Locals called it the Mistway. The clock on my dashboard blinked 11:13 p.m. as I rounded one of the sharper bends. That's when I saw the car. It was a blue sedan, parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking weakly. I slowed down, the instinct to help kicking in before my brain could protest. I pulled over and stepped out, the night air biting against my scrubs. As I approached the car, I could see a woman in the driver's seat. She looked to be in her early 30s, her face pale under the faint interior light. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, and she didn't seem to notice me. I tapped on the window. "Hey, do you need help?" Her head turned slowly toward me. Her eyes met mine, wide and filled with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. She didn't speak, just stared. "Are you okay?" I asked again, louder this time. Finally, she nodded, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. That's when I noticed the back seat. A child, a boy no older than 6, sat strapped into a booster seat, his head hung low, his face hidden. Something about the scene made my stomach twist. "Is he all right?" I asked, pointing toward the boy. Her expression changed, panic flashing across her features. She opened her mouth again, but before she could respond, a deafening horn shattered the stillness. A truck. I turned, my heart stopping as I saw it barreling toward us, headlights blazing through the fog. It wasn't slowing down. "Get out of the car," I shouted. The woman didn't move. I yanked the door open, grabbing her arm, but she resisted, pulling back with surprising strength. "The boy!" she cried. I didn't hesitate. I dove into the back seat, fumbling with the seatbelt around the child. The truck's roar grew louder, closer. My hands were shaking as I finally freed the buckle. "Go!" I shouted, shoving the boy toward the woman. She grabbed him, clutching him to her chest as she scrambled out of the car. I followed, but the truck was on us now, too close. I didn't think. I shoved them both toward the ditch and dove after them. The impact came a split second later. The truck smashed into the sedan with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. The force of it sent the car skidding across the road before it slammed into a tree, bursting into flames. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the distant crackle of fire. I lay there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the cold mud of the ditch soaking into my clothes. The woman was beside me, clutching the boy tightly. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, but she was alive. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded slowly, then looked at the boy. "He's fine," she murmured, brushing his hair back. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. As I looked closer at the boy, something felt off. His skin was pale, too pale, and his eyes, they weren't focused. "Is he hurt?" I asked, sitting up. The woman shook her head. He's not hurt." Her voice trembled and tears welled up in her eyes. I reached out, checking for a pulse. Nothing. His body was cold. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's been gone for weeks." I stared at her, the words not making sense. "What are you talking about?" She looked at me then, her face crumpling. "We were in an accident, right here on this road. I survived, but he didn't. I've been driving ever since, looking for him." My blood ran cold. I scrambled to my feet, backing away. The boy, lifeless moments ago, now turned his head toward me, his eyes locked onto mine, dark and unblinking. The woman stood, cradling him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" My voice shook. "For saving us." Before I could respond, a car horn blared behind me. I turned instinctively, shielding my eyes from the glare of headlights. When I looked back, they were gone. The woman, the boy, the wreckage. I stood there for what felt like hours, the fog curling around me like ghostly fingers. When I finally mustered the courage to walk back to my car, I found it parked neatly on the shoulder, the engine still running. The next day I checked the news. There it was. Fatal crash on Route 17 claims lives of mother and child. The article was dated 3 weeks ago. I haven't driven that road since. The day had been uneventful. One of those gray, midweek slogs where time seemed to drip like water from a leaky faucet. By evening, the monotony broke when my best friend Marcus called, proposing a spontaneous road trip. He'd found a diner 2 towns over that supposedly served the best pie in the state. I wasn't in the mood for a late drive, but his enthusiasm was infectious, and honestly, I needed the distraction. Marcus picked me up in his old black Impala. It was a beast of a car, sleek, roaring, and always a little temperamental. He treated that thing like it was his child, constantly fiddling with the engine or shining the hood to a mirror-like finish. It was nearing 9:30 when we hit the road, the sun fully tucked away beneath the horizon, leaving the world bathed in deep shades of blue and black. We took Cedar Lane, a winding road flanked by dense woods and dotted with sporadic streetlights. The road had a reputation, a place where urban legends were born. Some said a ghostly hitchhiker haunted it, while others swore they'd seen a phantom car chasing them before vanishing into thin air. I didn't believe in any of it, but Marcus, the skeptic turned paranormal enthusiast after binging too many late-night horror podcasts, loved the thrill of driving it. The drive was uneventful at first. We blasted classic rock, debated the merits of canned coffee, and argued over which was the best Batman. The woods seemed alive, though, the shadows between the trees shifting like they were playing tricks on my eyes. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and the rhythmic hum of the Impala's engine. About 20 minutes in, the music cut out abruptly, replaced by static. Marcus frowned, fiddling with the dials. "Stupid radio," he muttered, smacking the dashboard. "It's fine," I said. "We're in the middle of nowhere." But then I noticed something strange. The headlights ahead of us. A car, silver and sleek, had appeared out of nowhere. It was driving ahead at a steady speed, perfectly centered in the lane. "Where'd that come from?" I asked. "No idea," Marcus replied, squinting. "I didn't see it pull onto the road." We followed the car for several miles. It maintained a frustratingly consistent speed, just slow enough to make overtaking awkward. Marcus flashed the high beams, but the car didn't react. It just glided along like it owned the road. "Creepy," Marcus said. "Think we should pass?" I nodded. "Yeah, get around it. They're probably not paying attention." Marcus hit the gas, pulling into the opposite lane. As we drew parallel with the car, I glanced over. The driver's seat was empty. "What the hell?" I started, but before I could finish, the car swerved sharply, nearly hitting us. Marcus yanked the wheel, sending the Impala careening back into our lane. The silver car disappeared around a bend, and Marcus slammed on the brakes. We sat in silence for a moment, our breaths loud in the confined space. Marcus gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There was no one driving," Marcus said. His words were slow, deliberate, like he didn't quite believe them himself. We sat there, the engine idling, the headlights casting long shadows across the road. Then from somewhere up ahead, a horn blared, long and angry. It echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. "We should turn around," I said. Marcus nodded, throwing the Impala into reverse. But as he backed up, the headlights of the silver car appeared in the rearview mirror. It was parked in the middle of the road, its engine silent, its lights glaring like eyes in the darkness. "No way," Marcus whispered. He shifted into drive and floored it, speeding past the car. As we passed, I swear I saw the driver's seat again. This time there was a figure. A man, his face obscured by shadows, sitting perfectly still. His head turned slowly to follow us as we sped by. We didn't stop until we reached the diner. The bright neon lights felt like a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of Cedar Lane. We parked and ran inside, both of us too shaken to speak. The waitress greeted us with a smile that quickly faded when she saw our faces. "You boys all right?" Marcus nodded, but I shook my head. "We saw something, on Cedar Lane." Her face paled. "You didn't see a car, did you? Silver? No driver?" My stomach dropped. You know about it? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. People say it's been on that road for years. Some say it's a ghost car, others think it's, I don't know, something worse. Folks who see it usually don't come back. We didn't finish our pie. The ride home was silent, the Impala moving slower than usual. We avoided Cedar Lane, taking the long way back to town. When Marcus dropped me off, neither of us said much, but we both knew we wouldn't be driving that road again. Weeks later, I heard about an accident on Cedar Lane. A car, silver and sleek, was found smashed against a tree. The strange part? It was an old model, one that hadn't been made in decades, and the driver was missing. The locals whispered that it was the car's doing, that it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I haven't driven Cedar Lane since. Some nights, though, I dream about that car. It's always there, headlights glaring, its empty seat beckoning. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums and makes the tiniest sounds seem deafening. I had just wrapped up a shift at the factory, a grueling 12 hours of clanking machines and fluorescent lights. The highway back to my apartment was long and monotonous, cutting through miles of empty farmland. It was nearing 2 a.m. and the road was deserted. My truck, an old Ford that groaned with every turn of the wheel, rumbled along at a steady pace. The radio was tuned to some late-night talk show, the host droning on about conspiracy theories. I wasn't really listening. The words blended into the hum of the engine. That's when I saw her. She was standing by the side of the road, just beyond the beam of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, a misplaced tree or a post, but as I got closer, her silhouette sharpened. A woman, mid-30s maybe, wearing a dark coat and holding a small suitcase. Her other hand was raised, thumb outstretched in the universal signal for a ride. I almost drove past. It was late and she could have been anyone. But something about her struck me. She looked lost, alone. Against my better judgment, I pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. She approached cautiously, her movements deliberate. As she got closer, I noticed her face was pale, her features delicate. Her dark hair was tied back and her eyes, there was something unsettling about them. They were wide, unblinking, as if she were staring at something far beyond me. Need a ride? I asked, leaning out the window. She nodded silently and climbed in without a word, placing the suitcase on her lap. The air in the cab seemed to shift as soon as she shut the door, colder somehow. Where you headed? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Just up the road, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and pulled back onto the highway. The silence was heavy, broken only by the steady thrum of the tires on asphalt. I stole glances at her as I drove. She sat perfectly still, her hands clutching the suitcase tightly. You from around here? I ventured. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. I used to be. That was all she said. I didn't press further. A few miles passed, the darkness outside pressing against the windows. Then she spoke again, her words soft but firm. There's a turn up ahead. Take it. I frowned. The GPS didn't show any upcoming turns, just the straight shot of highway for another 20 miles. But before I could argue, my headlights swept across a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. It wasn't marked, barely visible in the gloom. Here, she said. Reluctantly, I turned onto the dirt road. It was rough and uneven, lined with tall trees that loomed like sentinels. The further we went, the darker it got, the canopy above blocking out even the faint light of the stars. Where exactly are we going? I asked, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Just a little further, she replied. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees on either side closing in tighter. Then suddenly she spoke again. Stop! I hit the brakes, the truck jerking to a halt. She pointed ahead toward a clearing just visible through the trees. In the center of the clearing sat an old, rusted car. The paint was peeling and the windows were cracked. Vines crept along its sides, as if the forest were trying to claim it. Wait here, she said, opening the door. She stepped out, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the car. Hey, I called after her. Are you sure this is... She didn't respond. I watched as she approached the rusted car, her figure small against the looming forest. She placed the suitcase on the ground and stood there for a moment, staring at the car. Then, slowly, she opened the driver's side door and climbed in. My heart was pounding. Something about the scene felt wrong, unnatural. I wanted to leave, to floor it and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't look away. The engine of the old car roared to life. I froze. That car hadn't moved in years. It couldn't have. But there it was, its headlights flickering on, cutting through the darkness. The woman sat motionless in the driver's seat, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the car sped forward, disappearing into the trees. The roar of the engine faded into the night, leaving only silence in its wake. I sat there, stunned, my hands gripping the wheel. After what felt like an eternity, I turned the truck around and drove back to the highway, my mind racing. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for any mention of the area, the car, or the woman. That's when I found it. An article, dated 15 years ago. A young woman had gone missing after a car accident on that stretch of road. Her car was found abandoned, rusted and overgrown, deep in the woods. No trace of her was ever discovered, just a single suitcase, locked tight, sitting on the passenger seat. I haven't driven that route since. Some nights, though, I dream of her, of the way she looked at me, her eyes distant and full of something I can't name. And I wonder, was I her last ride, or just another stop on her endless journey?